Three carriers don't move together. In 40 years of Gulf deployments, it has never happened. It's happening now. What did Iran do in the last 72 hours that triggered a three-carrier response? Why is the deadline set at 72 hours and what happens at hour 73? The US has issued formal warnings to Iran before, dozens of times, stern statements, repositioned destroyers, strongly worded. Through the Swiss diplomatic channel that Tehran uses as its backline to Washington, Iran has absorbed every one of them, calculated the response, waited, and continued. So when the Pentagon moves not one carrier, not two, but three strike groups onto a converging course 1,200 miles from the Iranian coastline, that is not a warning. That is a different kind of communication entirely, and Tehran knows the difference. The question is whether Washington does. What did Iran do in the last 72 hours that triggered a three-carrier response? Why is the deadline set at 72 hours and what happens at hour 73? And which of the three carriers was diverted from a completely different theater, and why does that diversion terrify Tehran more than the other two combined? Here is the board. The USS Harry S. Truman Strike Group was already in the Mediterranean. Its presence there connected to a separate pressure campaign that most analysts have been watching. The USS Carl Vinson was operating in the Indo-Pacific. Its patrol rhythm focused on the South China Sea. The USS Abraham Lincoln was in a scheduled maintenance window at Naval Station Bremerton, the kind of maintenance that, under normal circumstances, grounds a carrier for 6 to 8 weeks. All three are now underway. All three are on converging vectors. The Lincoln left Bremerton 17 days early. That detail, 17 days, is the number that no one in the mainstream coverage is treating with the weight it deserves. You don't pull a carrier out of maintenance 17 days early for a warning. To understand why this moment is different from every previous US-Iran confrontation cycle, you need to understand what changed in the 72 hours before the carrier orders were issued. Not the public 72 hours, the internal 72 hours, the sequence that ran through classified channels before any of it became visible through ship tracking data and Pentagon briefings. It begins with a signals intelligence intercept. The specific content remains classified, but its existence was confirmed indirectly through a statement by the Director of National Intelligence that referenced credible and specific threat information language that, in the precise vocabulary of intelligence community public communications, means the intercept was actionable, not analytical, not a pattern, not a trend assessment, a specific communication from a specific sender about a specific intended action within a specific window. That window is 72 hours, and it is not a deadline Washington set. It is a deadline Iran set for itself and Washington intercepted. Think about what that means. The carrier movements are not designed to stop something Iran is considering. They are designed to stop something Iran has already decided to do and has communicated. Internally, as a 72-hour execution window, the warning is not "don't do this." The warning is "we know when you plan to do it." That distinction changes the entire strategic calculus. When a warning precedes a decided action, the actor receiving it faces a binary: execute and absorb the consequence, or stand down and absorb the humiliation. Iran has never, in 45 years of the Islamic Republic, publicly stood down under direct US military pressure without extracting something in return: a sanctions concession, a prisoner release, a quiet withdrawal of a specific asset from a specific theater. The 72-hour clock is not just a military deadline, it is a negotiating window, and someone in Tehran is deciding right now what price standing down is worth, or they've already decided not to stand down. The Lincoln's early departure from Bremerton tells you which scenario the Pentagon is actually planning for. Maintenance withdrawals at that scale, pulling a Nimitz-class carrier off a scheduled dry dock cycle, require a finding by the Secretary of Defense that an emergent operational requirement supersedes the maintenance timeline. That finding requires specific intelligence justification. It requires the SecDef to certify in writing that the carrier is operationally necessary within a time frame that cannot accommodate the remaining 17 days of scheduled work. That certification happened, which means someone at the highest level of the U.S. defense establishment looked at the 72-hour intercept and concluded that two carriers were not enough. What does the third carrier add that the first two couldn't provide, and what does that answer reveal about the target? Let's talk about what three carriers actually give you that two don't. The answer is not firepower. The Truman and the Vinson together represent more than 130 strike aircraft, multiple guided missile cruisers, and enough Tomahawk capacity to run simultaneous strike packages against 400 separate aim points. That is not a capability gap that a third carrier fills. What a third carrier provides is something more specific and more telling about what the Pentagon believes Iran's intended action actually is: coverage, specifically simultaneous coverage of three separate geographic threat axes without compromising any single axis to reinforce another. Axis 1, the Strait of Hormuz and the Northern Gulf, the oil choke point, the mine threat, the fast attack corridor. Axis 2, the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea approaches, the submarine patrol zone, the anti-ship ballistic missile engagement envelope, the vector from which an Iranian strike on Diego Garcia would have to originate. Axis 3, the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb, the Houthi operational theater, the southern shipping choke point, the corridor that connects Iranian proxy action in Yemen to the broader encirclement strategy we've covered before. Two carriers can cover two axes. They cannot cover three simultaneously without creating a gap, Iran's military. Planners know exactly where that gap is. They have been mapping it literally, physically, through the barge intelligence program for 3 years. The third carrier closes the gap, and the fact that a third carrier was needed tells you that the intercepted 72-hour plan involves not one axis of action, it involves all three. Simultaneously. Simultaneous, three theaters, one 72-hour window. This is the operational concept Iran has been building toward, not a single provocation, not a single strike, a coordinated multi-theater action designed to create a response dilemma so severe that the U.S. cannot reinforce any single point without uncovering another, the Houthis. Surge in the Red Sea, naval assets activate in the Gulf. A proxy strike, Hezbollah or PEMF hits a U.S. base in Iraq or Syria simultaneously. Each action is individually below the threshold that compels a full military response. Together, they create a combined effect that no single carrier group can answer and that the global media covers as three separate, unrelated events while Tehran watches Washington try to decide which fire to fight first. Has this three-axis coordination been attempted before, and what happened the last time Iran tried it? Here is the answer, and it reframes everything that's happening right now. In April 2024, Iran launched its first direct strike on Israeli territory. 170 drones, 30 cruise missiles, 120 ballistic missiles, fired in a coordinated sequence designed to overwhelm Israeli and American layered air defenses through simultaneous saturation across multiple vectors. The strike was, by virtually every independent military assessment, operationally more sophisticated than anything Iran had previously attempted. It was also, by virtually every independent military assessment, a dress rehearsal, not for a strike on Israel, for a strike on a target where the U.S. cannot use Israeli airspace, Israeli radar networks, or Israeli Iron Dome batteries as a forward defensive layer. The Gulf, specifically the Gulf, where the only defensive architecture is American, the only early warning is American, and the only intercept capability is American, stretched across three axes, 1,200 miles of operational space, with a 72-hour execution window already running. The April 2024 strike gave Iran three things it needed. First, real-time data on American intercept response times, how long from launch detection to intercept, what the intercept sequencing looks like, where the saturation threshold is. Second, an understanding of which missile types penetrated furthest before intercept. Information that directly informs the weapons mix for the next operation. Third, and most importantly, a public demonstration that a coordinated multi-vector strike is executable at scale, which matters for the psychological dimension of deterrence as much as the military dimension. Iran fired that strike and absorbed the international condemnation. It accepted the reputational cost. It accepted the diplomatic cost, because what it got in return was a live fire test of American and allied air defense performance under real operational conditions at a cost of approximately $80 million in munitions against a target where the political cost of full retaliation was prohibitive. The April 2024 strike was, in the language of military acquisition, a developmental test. What is coming, what the 72-hour intercept describes, is the operational deployment. The three carriers are now, as of this moment, at the following approximate positions. The Truman Strike Group has transited the Suez Canal and is operating in the Red Sea covering Axis 3, the Houthi corridor, positioned to interdict any Houthi surge while maintaining strike range on Yemen and the Bab el-Mandeb, the Vinson Strike Group has accelerated from the Indo-Pacific and is now in the Arabian Sea, approximately 600 nautical miles southeast of the Strait of Hormuz covering Axis 2, the submarine and anti-ship missile envelope. The Lincoln, 17 days out of maintenance, is transiting the Pacific at flank speed. Its estimated arrival in the operational theater, 96 hours, 4 days. The 72-hour window closes before the Lincoln arrives. That timing is not an accident. Either Iran's operational planners set the 72-hour window knowing the Lincoln wouldn't be in theater, meaning the three-axis gap exists for a specific window that Iran intends to exploit, or the Lincoln's early departure was itself the intelligence signal that changed Iran's calculus, and Tehran is now deciding whether the window has been compromised. Either way, the next 72 hours resolve that question, and the answer determines whether what follows is a contained escalation or something that rewrites the security architecture of the entire Gulf region. Here is what a contained escalation looks like. Iran executes a portion of the Plana Houthi surge, a single precision strike on an non-US Gulf asset, a mine activation in a shipping lane, and absorbs the response. The US retaliates against a proxy target, not Iranian soil. Both sides declare victory through their respective media. Architectures, oil spikes, insurance premiums triple again. The back channel through Oman reopens within 2 weeks. The escalation ladder goes up 2 rungs and then stabilizes. The world continues, expensively, tensely, but it continues. Here is what an uncontained escalation looks like. Iran executes the full three-axis plan. Houthis surge at Bab el Mandeb simultaneously with ERG naval activation in the Gulf simultaneously with a PEMF strike on Al-Udeid Dora US base in Iraq. The US faces a response decision across 3 simultaneous theaters with 2 carrier groups. And a Lincoln that won't arrive for 96 hours. A strike on Iranian soil becomes the only response option that carries sufficient deterrent weight. That strike triggers the Hormuz closure. Oil hits $140. The US economy absorbs the shock. But here is the variable that no one is modeling publicly. China, specifically, what China does in the South China Sea in the 48 hours after a US strike on Iranian soil when 2 of 3 American carrier groups are committed to the Gulf theater and the third is still in transit. That window, that 48-hour window of reduced American carrier presence in the Indo-Pacific, it is the variable that connects this crisis to a theater most people aren't watching, and it is the variable that Iran's planners, in their most optimistic scenario, are counting on someone else to exploit. Here's the full picture. 3 carriers don't move together because of a warning. They move together because an intercept described a 72-hour coordinated 3-theater action that 2 carriers could not simultaneously cover. The Lincoln left maintenance 17 days early because someone certified in writing that 2 was not enough. The April 2024 strike on Israel was a live fire developmental test for the weapons mix and intercept timing data now being used to plan what the intercept describes, and the 72-hour window closes before the Lincoln arrives, a timing detail that is either Iran's operational edge or the signal that compromised the entire plan. What did Iran do in the last 72 hours that triggered a 3-carrier response? It didn't do something. It decided something internally, and the intercept of that decision, not any public action, is what moved 3 carriers. Why is the deadline set at 72 hours? Because that is the window between the Lincoln's absence and its arrival. Iran set the clock. Washington intercepted it. Now both sides are watching the same countdown from opposite sides of the same decision, which leaves the third loop, the one about which carrier was diverted from a different theater and why it terrifies Tehran more than the other 2. The Lincoln came from Bremerton, but the Vincent came from the South China Sea. Its diversion from that theater was a signal not just to Iran but to Beijing, a signal that the United States was willing to reduce its Indo-Pacific carrier presence to concentrate force in the Gulf. That willingness either deters China from the window Iran's planners were counting on, or it tells Beijing that the moment is now before the Vincent returns. That calculation, in a room in Beijing that no Western journalist has ever entered, is being made right now. And whatever comes out of it determines whether the next 72 hours end with a contained escalation in the Gulf or something that begins in the South China Sea and ends nowhere anyone has yet modeled.